Hey there, it's 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, which means we all know what it means, another riveting episode of Behind Breaking Bond. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Randy Wallace, and you are
Andy Kahn, Director of Victim Services, Crime Stoppers of Houston, and this is our last show for 2022.
That's correct.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is it. So bring it on. We're going to talk about everything. This is it. I mean, according to all the news stations, we're all going to freeze up.
That's right.
We're all going to shrivel up in a few days anyway.
Okay, when you look back at 2022, what are you thinking? What's your takeaway?
The biggest takeaway I have from this year is the drop of defendants charged with murder who were previously out on more than one felony bond or a PR bond or bond forfeiture. I mean, the numbers for 2020 and 2021 were like 130 of the 185 that I'm at right now.
Yeah.
And so for 2019, there was like 20, but I've seen, I mean, and that's a good thing.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
It's a good thing. And I think, you know, without tooting our horn or whatever, I think a lot of it's because we've brought attention to this issue. So the majority of defendants charged with murder in 2022 were not out on multiple felonies. Right.
And just to clarify for folks who might be joining us and haven't seen a whole lot of this, basically Andy has kept a running tally, if you will, of people, residents of Harris County that were killed allegedly at the hands of a repeat violent offender, free from jail on multiple felony or PR bonds. That's kind of what your whole
I started
recording
noticing
was.
this
Yes.
trend in 2020, and I just started documenting. I went back to 2018, actually. Just saw a handful, and in 2019, it kind of uptick. And then, I mean, the numbers just boomed in 2020 and 21. And I was kind of expecting the same thing in 2022, but so I was pleasantly surprised to see the numbers basically cut in half.
Well, I do, and I mean, I don't want to, I'm like you, I'm not taking credit for anything at all, but I do think that judges started paying attention because we were calling them out for, hey, you could have had to put this individual, you could have posted a higher bond. I mean, we were seeing people that were getting PR, get out of jail free cards, going on to commit murder.
Well, one of the things that happened was, of course, we passed Senate Bill 6.
Yes.
That went into effect. It was basically said no more get out of jail, free card, PR, personal recognizance bonds for any defendant charged with a violent crime, especially murder. So that ship sailed as well. And I think, you know, it obviously became an election issue as well, because you had, in the primaries, you had a majority of the judges that had, you know, couldn't just skate free. They had, you know, challenges within their own party on that issue. And basically the issue was allowing repeat offenders to go back to the community. So it became a huge issue.
And again, that was, when I look back at the year, I think that was very telling because, for one, it was unprecedented. You did not see that many sitting judges lose outright in a primary. Am I right?
I've been doing this 30 years. I've never seen an incumbent judge actually being contested within their own party normally you get a free ticket to the general election. I've never, and that's, you know, to me, that said a lot when you're being challenged within your own party as well. So I think a lot of that just, you know, so the differences that I've seen are bonds that I've never seen before in my life.
High bonds.
I mean, you look at the guy that's charged in the Takeoff murder.
Yeah.
Originally it was $2 million.
Yeah.
And then they cut it
to $1 million.
Like they were doing some big favor to $1 million. I'm going, I didn't even.
Well, and you know, too, you talk about that case in particular. His attorney, I mean, they went to the court and his attorney was like, here's his passport. And there was apparently some confusion. There were two different sides to did he have a bunch of money and was he going to flee the country? But then, you know, in the hearing, it came out that, well, no, he apparently canceled the trip to Mexico 2 days or whatever before he was arrested. So, I mean, the guy, I think when you say, here, court, here's my passport, you're pretty much showing that you don't plan to
Well,
flee the country.
in that case, if you look at it and you look at it objectively, the individual charged in the murder doesn't have a criminal history.
Right, that's right, yeah.
Whatever the charge that happened was dismissed, so he's got no convictions on the
And
record.
kind of had roots here in a way, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, I look at that and I look at some of the other victims' families, and I can see their frustration, because I've heard
Yeah,
their frustration. Why does that particular
Right.
defendant get this huge bond, and the person that killed my loved one gets a 50,000, 100, whatever on that as well? And it's hard to put that into context.
well, anytime, and I think unfortunately, we've become a society where if you're a celebrity or everybody knows you, things are handled differently. And that obviously is wrong, but that's just kind of the way it is.
It's human nature, yeah.
It is. Look at, I think, Gabby, I can never think of her last name, the pretty blonde.
Yeah, Congresswoman in Arizona.
No, the one that was, she went on the trip with the boyfriend and the boyfriend allegedly killed her.
Oh, yeah, the one out in.
I mean,
Mexico,
everybody
right.
everybody was
Right.
paying attention to this. And it brought up kind of a troubling thing. She's white, blonde, blue-eyed, pretty. Everybody cares about her. And then all of these other stories came out about women that had been missing, women of color that had been missing for months, that there was no media attention to it. No one was saying anything. And I think that case is a good example of sometimes as a society, we get all wrapped up in focusing on somebody that we know because we know who they are, or we've heard of them, or we think that, well, they're not more important, but there's something about the picture that's painted that, okay, let's all care about this person, when there's so many other people that are basically in the same situation and they're not getting any attention.
No, murder's
at
a
all.
murder. And I used to say, there's front page stories and back page stories. There's the ones that, you get a friend. Then there's the ones that you get the little brief
Yeah.
on,
We'd call those widgets.
with somebody
widget.
that was, and yet the results are the same. And that's just, to use throw in George Orwell's Animal, for those that might have actually read that book. I was forced to read that book, but it's the same thing. You remember, some are created equally, some are treated differently
Right.
than others. And I think that's a perfect example of it. But I do think things are trending in the right direction.
I do too.
It'll be interesting to see this upcoming year, because you will have several new judges taking the bench.
Right.
Of course, you have those that are returning as well. So, I get at, well, how do you, I said, I don't know. Time will tell whether it.
And I think another good thing that came this year was all of a sudden you had to have 10%. I mean, that sort of, there was a lot of stuff going around, and you kind of had to wonder because, and we wouldn't even be hearing about these defendants that had payment plans. How do you have a payment
I
plan
had
for bond?
no idea.
Right.
And you had no clue either.
No.
You're a big-time Emmy Award-winning investigative reporter, right? And you didn't even know.
I did not know.
Nobody
I did
knew
not
this
know.
was going on, because we all just assumed if you got $100,000 bond, you had to cough up 10%.
Yeah.
To get out.
And it was kind of one of those, it was just an understood thing. There was never any kind of law
There's
or
none.
any, right, that
It's
addressed it
an
to say this is how it
unwritten
works, right.
It's an unwritten rule, and Paul Castro's case brought that, I think,
Yes.
clearly to the forefront, because, and for those that don't remember, Paul Castro's son, they were leaving the Astros game in 2021, and it was a road rage from what, and Paul's son David was shot and killed by a defendant who had just been released on prison, and when they finally took him into custody, he was given a bond. And it was actually a pretty high bond at the time. It was $350,000,
Yeah.
$400,000. But there were a lot of people that were outraged that he was getting a bond. And then I think come to find out that, you thought it was 10%, but he was on some cut rate payment plan.
Yeah.
Like you would go buy a car and you'd work out monthly payments. And then So that's going to be an issue that's going to be brought up next legislative session.
And you brought up Paul Castro. Another thing too that I think was really good to see it. Crime victims, they're over time they've been vocal, but I think the thing that we saw, especially during the election, is we saw a lot of crime victims that they came out kind of in full force, and it was like they're on TV talking about it, and they were not silent. They wanted to see changes made.
No, they were organized and they became vocal. And from my position as a victim advocate, I mean, I admire the heck
Yes.
as someone that can take a negative and turn what happened to their family into some positive action for social change. So I'm hoping that will continue next legislative session, because there's going to be some issues that are coming up that we're going to need their help on.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Tell folks what you're hoping to see happen during the legislative session.
Well, one of the loopholes that we found out when we passed you can't get a PR bond when you're charged with a violent offense is, how do you define what is a violent offense?
Right.
And in this day and age where everybody's talking about gun violence, what can we do? Gun violence. And again, Crime Stoppers started noticing another disturbing trend, and that is defendants who were charged with felon in possession of a weapon, a gun, were getting PR bonds. And so we started compiling lists and numbers on that as well. And one of the stories that you and I did, that was probably one of the most disturbing stories, because I know that caught a lot of senators' attention, and that was the guy that had just gotten out on parole for an aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon, again a gun. And 2 weeks later, he gets charged with a felon in possession of a weapon, and then they give him a PR bond, even though he's on parole for a violent offense.
And that's such a red flag, because if you're on parole and you want to do good and you're turning your life around, you don't want to walk around with a gun. You don't need to walk around with a gun. A felon is not walking around with a gun to protect themselves.
No, and that again brought up the bigger picture. And it would be, I'm sure if we went back and looked at all the breaking bond stories that we did, you and I talked, because one of the common denominators we see with a lot of the defendants who are then charged with murder is they had a felon in possession of a weapon conviction, or they were on bond, one of their offenses that they were on bond.
And sometimes several of them. Like we would find defendants that had they either were convicted of a couple of times, or they were out on bond for a couple of felon in possession of a weapon charges. I mean, it's a serious thing, and that's something else too that I hope that lawmakers consider that, and also that the judges, when they see defendants with felon in possession of a weapon, that they don't take that lightly, because we've seen instances where they've gone on to kill people.
Well, if you want to crack down on gun violence, I mean, to me, this is kind of a win-win. How do you justify repeatedly releasing convicted felons charged with having a gun, which is A, illegal to begin with.
Right.
B, if you're having a gun, it's usually not, it's not for good intentions that you're having it. So I don't know how you justify repetitively releasing that.
And there, and I want to make it very clear that yes, there are people that go to prison, they get out of prison, they're on parole, they do what they're supposed to do, they turn their lives around, they become productive members of society. There are people that do that, and my hat's off to them. They should be proud of themselves.
I'll tell you a story. Many moons ago, I had hair like yours, and I was a parole officer back in the dark ages before computers or anything like that. And it was about 3 years ago. I was going to a grocery store, and I'm walking in the store, and I see this guy running up, and my flags go up, and I see him going, Mr. Khan, and I'm like, oh God, what's going to happen? And he comes up to me and he goes, I just want to thank you. And he goes, you might not remember me. He said, my name, and he told me his name. He said, you were my parole officer. And he said, you were always on my case. And you always this. He goes, I just want you to know that I'm married. I own my own business now. And I just want to thank you for, being, who you were back then. And I was floored.
That's great.
Came up and hugged me. And I love telling that story.
Well, and that's somebody that came up to you and told you that. There are other people that you touched their lives too. They just didn't run into you and see you and say, hey, remember me?
Yes. So, you are correct. The majority of people that do come out of prison do end up becoming, but it's problematic from what we see. And that's an issue that we got to deal with.
Right.
That's just.
And two, I know I've said this a million times, but I don't want to give anybody the impression that we've ever felt like people didn't deserve a bond. Everyone has the constitutional right to a bond. You should be able to not be incarcerated while you're waiting to go to trial. But if you're getting bond after bond after bond after bond, something is amiss.
Well, you look at some of the stories we did recently with the guy that was on multiple bonds, and then come to find out after he was on bond, the feds popped on.
Yeah, right.
For something else. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because as far as we could tell, the dude was wanted. But then we find out that he's in an ICE facility in Conroe. I'm like, what? How does that even work?
Well, we do know, obviously, in order for him to be in that facility, he was actually had to be charged with something, and he was charged while he was wanted in Harris County.
And I never did completely understand it, but somehow he had some sort of a federal indictment that dealt with some of the state charges he had. But it was all very confusing to me. I will say that was the first time, to my knowledge, that we ever call somebody wanted and they weren't wanted.
No, they weren't wanted. We wanted them.
Right.
The good thing is, hey, Crime Stoppers didn't have to shell out a reward. He was already locked up.
He was behind bars.
It didn't again take away from the initial premise, though, that he was out on reduced bonds and he had umpteenth amount of convictions to begin with. So at one point he was wanted.
Yes. But we're of course going to be doing Breaking Bond in 2023. I'm in. Are you in?
2023. Wow.
I know.
Yeah, I think we were renewed for another 2 years. The Big Time Network.
We were on the bubble there for a while.
It was close.
It was touch and go.
It was close, but I think in November, decisions were made.
That's right.
So it's going to be, like I said, it's going to be a very interesting year legislatively, looking at and the issue on bond reform, particularly in Harris County, is going to be front and center.
Yes.
This upcoming session.
And obviously, all you folks out there that watch this, you care about the subject matter. You care about this issue. That's why I do it, because I care about it. It's a public safety issue. I think I speak for you when you say the same thing. You care about it because it's a public safety issue. It has nothing to do with being a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or whatever.
No, we're just, like I said, none of the victims that I worked with, cared whether they were whatever party affiliated they were.
Yeah.
They just want things to get better and things to change. And, if you look at the homicide rate, it's been a slight reduction this year, but as I like to say, it would be kind of hard to compete with a record-breaking 2021. So the numbers might have gone down, but they're still not at any levels it was prior to 2018.
And I think if you kept track of the number of people that were shot, it would be so. We live with a medical center that Ben Taub Hospital is probably the best place in the world to go for trauma if you've been shot or something like that. It's the medical profession here is great, and they
There's a lot
save
of people-
people's
there's a lot of
lives.
people that are alive in this day and age that years ago would
Right.
have been succumbed and would have been counted as a homicide victim.
Right, so I mean, you have to kind of put that in perspective when you talk about the murder rate, because there's so many people that end up shot, and luckily they survive. So you've got to kind of put that in there when you consider numbers. And I've never been real big on statistics anyway. You know what I mean? So you could go either way with them.
I was talking to one murderer years ago, and he said, "Well, he goes, lucky more people weren't killed." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I was a bad shot."
Yeah,
So,
right, yeah, I mean,
so what do we got tonight?
oh, yeah, be sure to watch tonight's Breaking Bond. This is an issue that we've touched on before, talking about defendants who are on parole. Now, keep in mind, if you're on parole and you pick up a new criminal charge, TDCJ could yank you. They could put
Especially
you
if
back
they're
into prison,
Yes, they can.
right?
You're basically serving the remainder of your sentence in the community.
You
So
are not
you
a free person.
You're still under state custody. So when you're charged with a felony while you're on parole, it's questionable whether you're going to continue to be on parole or not. So we got the one guy that we're featuring tonight was on parole for an aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon, again, a gun. He's got prior convictions, and he picked up another felony, and he was given a PR bond. Again, I don't know how you justify that, but now he's charged with murder, and somebody paid that price.
Sadly so. Yeah, we're going to keep hitting the issue. We will not be around next Tuesday because I'll be off, but we'll be back on the 3rd.
But then again, you might be stuck at the airport.
We can do a live or a Zoom from the airport. Hey,
All right.
thank you all
Good
so
night.
much for watching. Have a great, happy holiday. Bye.